Is Abraham the prophet of God? In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Abraham is a venerated patriarch whose relationship with God provides the foundational story for God's beneficial relationship with humanity. According to biblical tradition and some say myth, Abraham, c. 20th century BCE, was born in or near the city of Ur in Mesopotamia, most likely in southern Chaldea. Abraham, originally named Abram, married his half-sister, Sarah, originally named Sarai, and began a long journey from Mesopotamia to Haran, and then later to Canaan and Egypt. Detailed in the book of Genesis, chapters 12 to 25, Abraham's name comes to mean father of a multitude and or the friend of God. His journey, as depicted in the Bible, is a long and dramatic one, with Abraham and Sarah encountering many different cultures, customs, and people groups along the Fertile Crescent from Mesopotamia to Egypt. The Bible notes that at age 75, Abraham received a divine invitation, or calling from God, Yahweh, to travel to a distant land where God would reward him beyond measure. Genesis 12:1-3 states, "Despite the inherent dangers of traveling at such an old age, and through unknown and unfriendly territory, Abraham trusted God and took his entire family, including his father and nephew Lot, and personal possessions on his trek to this promised land." The first part of the trip purportedly took them to Haran, in northern Mesopotamia, where his father, Terah, died at age 205. In the second part of the trip, Abraham's caravan entered and toured through Canaan, where God appeared to Abraham, saying, "To your offspring I will give this land." 12:7. In celebration and worship, Abraham built an altar to God and then went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. 12:8. As earlier, Genesis notes that Abraham built another altar to God before moving again to the Negev, southwest of the Dead Sea. A sad but normal part of ancient Middle Eastern existence, a terrible famine swept through Canaan, and Abraham and his family escaped to Egypt for rescue and relief. The move was far from reassuring as Abraham began to fear for his life, because of the beauty of his 65-year-old wife. Abraham asserted, "When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live." 12:12. In shrewdness or out of cowardice, Abraham instructed his wife to pretend to be his sister, which was already factually true, Sarah being his half-sister. Abraham's concerns were justified, apparently, because after they entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when the Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, possibly Senusret II, who ruled Egypt from 1897 to 1878 BCE, and she was taken into his palace. 12:14-15. For Abraham, this was not the worst of situations, for he received many gifts from Pharaoh, including cattle and servants. Still, the Bible recounts that God was not pleased with the scenario surrounding Abraham and Sarah. The Pharaoh and his household soon experienced horrible plagues, which alerted him to Abraham's ruse. Pharaoh exclaimed, "What have you done to me?" 12:18 shames Abraham for his deception and demands that they both leave, although he allows Abraham to keep his gifts, interestingly. Thereafter, Genesis records that Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. 13:1-2. Returning to Canaan, Abraham and his tribe thrive and expand even more than before, which leads to intertribal bickering and competition between Abraham and Lot's shepherds over grazing lands for their ever-increasing herds. Genesis states, "Thus, the two split up, and Abraham chose the plain of Hebron to call home, and Lot chose the plain of Sodom, which would end up a disastrous choice for Lot and his family. One of the central parts of the story of Abraham and Sarah concerns their inability to conceive a child, which was very important in antiquity both socially and for survival. Childlessness and barrenness in the patriarchal age was considered a sign of shame upon the woman, typically the result of undisclosed sin in her life. Additionally, children were considered a blessing and a form of social security, ensuring protection and care in people's old age. Understandably, in Genesis 15:1, Abraham laments. The Bible once again provides a glimpse into the intimate relationship between Abraham and his deity, with God proclaiming, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." 1 And Abraham taking God at his word, which God credited it to him as righteousness. 15:6. Abraham's wife, Sarah, however, was less patient and more desperate to have a child. Herself apparently barren and of advanced years, Sarah orders Abraham to have sexual relations with their Egyptian slave, Hagar, whose child Sarah would take to raise as her own. Although this offends modern sensibilities for its cruelty and exploitation, sexual encounters between slaves and owners were not an unusual event. As a slave, Hagar had few, if any, rights of ownership. Additionally, such a liaison provided deeper integration into the household and could create greater social security for the slave. Still, biological and emotional bonds between mothers and their children are very strong, so, understandably, Sarah and Hagar grew to dislike each other immensely, ending with taunting from Hagar and physical abuse from Sarah upon each other. The Bible states, "Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her," 16:7, and went out into the desert, dangerously, without proper supplies. Fortunately for Hagar, according to the biblical text, God sent an angel of the Lord to rescue and restore her to Sarah. He said, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." 16:9-10. This adds another cultural wrinkle to the tale, as slavery was an integral part of ancient existence, with slavery providing key benefits that accompanied its social restrictions for many people, and especially for women. This leads to another of the most poignant moments of the Bible, when Hagar gives God a name, El Roi. She states, "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me." 16:13. In an era where slaves were considered mere property and women were relegated to a lower social class, the Bible speaks of God's great mercy and compassion for Hagar despite her lowly position, affirming her humanity and value in the world. Hagar returned to Sarah and delivered her child to Abraham, age 86, who God instructed to name the child Ishmael. 16:11. Although he would eventually become the father of the Arab nations, the Hebrew scripture described Ishmael as a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. 16:12. Some years later, Genesis records that God expanded his covenant with Abraham, charging him to walk before me faithfully and be blameless. "Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." 17:1-2. Abraham prostrated himself in reverence as God then described this new eternal covenant between them that required a lengthening of his name officially to Abraham, but a shortening of his anatomy. God proclaimed, "This was to be Abraham and his nation's community agreement with God, a physical token and expression of their love and commitment to each other." With this sacrifice and serious expression of devotion and obedience, God would bless the nation as he was going to bless Abraham and Sarah, with a child of their own, finally. Both nearly 100 years old, The prospect of getting pregnant and delivering that child seemed an impossibility. In fact, when he heard the news that they would be parents, Abraham fell face down. He laughed, 17:17, as did Sarah. Still, the Bible records that God assured the elderly couple, "But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year," 17:20-21. Obedient to the end, Abraham circumcised his son, Ishmael, as well as all the men in his tribe.